Alright, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Tokenicer, and I'm here to bring you guys in-depth analysis, news, and insights on the digital asset space, along with covering the progressive tokenization of the world. And if you haven't already, follow the Twitter to connect with me and stay up to date. Check out the Medium for more articles on fundamental analysis, and the Spotify for some more podcasts. All this will be down in the description below. We're going to be breaking down the executive order that Joe Biden had put out just the other day on how he thinks the US should best regulate and contain this digital asset space. Because as we know, we've been looking for regulatory clarity for quite a while now. Because right now it's a fucking mess, as we've seen with some of the lawsuits the SEC has filed against, well, Ripple mainly, but then there's also some other lending platforms that are caught in the sticky situation like BlockFi. So hopefully this executive order from Biden will give us some more clarity about the direction the US is hoping the space takes. And remember, the US pretty much being the most powerful country in the world right now, and for the past, I don't know, however many years or so, but whatever they do here is really going to set the tone for what all these other countries are considering with this space. But as always, before we get started, I just got to remind you guys that I'm not a financial advisor, and therefore nothing you ever hear or read from me should ever be taken as financial or investment advice. But now that we got that out of the way, let's get right into it. So here's the executive order we're going to be breaking down for you guys today. But first off, what exactly is an executive order? Put simply, an executive order is a rule that's made by the US president, in this case, Joe Biden, that all other agencies and officers of the federal government in the country will have to follow by. So they start off here kind of just talking about the goods and bads of this asset class, how it brings leadership, privacy, and power to the global financial system, but also poses some threats in terms of protecting retail, financial stability, security issues, and the whole ESG debate. Then they're just kind of talking about the explosive growth this asset class has seen here, saying we broke through a $3 trillion market cap in November from the $14 billion we were just sitting at 5 years ago. So that's a 21,328% growth over 5 years, or an average of 4,200% a year. So just think about that for a moment. That's fucking ridiculous. Most industries are considered doing well if they're growing at 30% year over year. And they kind of talk about the growing adoption of crypto and the fact that a majority of countries in the world are already looking at building a central bank digital currency, CBDC, which I'm sure we all know by now anyways. And they also seem to understand that to continue being a technological leader in this world, they're going to have this innovative technology flow into their economy and actually be supportive of the growth that's happening. But at the same time, they want certain rules in place for things like ESG, investor protection, and all that other stuff. So Section 2 now starts to go over the key objectives they've got in this executive order. So first off, protecting consumers and businesses. Of course, that's their first goal, right? If they really gave a shit about this stuff, I doubt XRP would be in the situation it's in today, and we'd likely have a spot Bitcoin ETF trading on the US exchanges by now. And a lot of other things, like not going after lending platforms. But anyways, back to the point. So they're highlighting some of the risks in the current market, saying how with the lack of oversight and standards at the moment, firms that are providing digital assets may provide inadequate protection for sensitive financial data, custody, and other sensitive data. And then just some more about the problems with like exchanges being hacked and stuff. So here's an actual legitimate issue. They're trying to find a way to sort of boost up the security of these exchanges and ensuring the safety and privacy of the citizens when they're using these exchanges. Now, how they're going to do that exactly, we're not quite sure yet. I mean, whether you're using a centralized or decentralized exchange, since we're still so early in this space, there's going to be a small bit of risk regardless, as we've seen with countless hacks on exchanges, which I do agree to be a big problem if we're looking to reach mass adoption. I mean, could you imagine if, say, like the New York Stock Exchange got hacked? And part 2 of this section kind of highlights more over similar things, but also goes over how a lot of these exchanges at the moment don't quite fall in line with regulations and how they can potentially pose financial risks. But the good thing here seems to be this little sentence at the end, where they're talking about there may need to be an evolution to regulatory approach to adequately address these risks. So in other words, there needs to be new rules in place, or updated rules, to regulate this space. Who the fuck would have thought? Maybe you guys can start off with not using an 80-year-old HOWEY test to try and regulate this space, cause a lot of shit has changed since then. Then section C talks about how the use of digital assets in illicit finance and crimes. So your basic things like using crypto to buy drugs, money laundering, funding terrorism, and all those things. I probably shouldn't have said basic things there, but basic crypto FUD. And in this, they highlight things like DeFi and peer-to-peer trading, making it very hard for these rules to be properly put in place. So while this is definitely a concern, since it is something that does still happen, I would bet money that way more criminals use the US dollar to launder money, traffic, or do whatever than use crypto. And that's not to say that's okay, just that it's nothing new just because of the rise in this space. And then they kind of go on about how the US wants to maintain their significant position and leadership in the global financial system, all while still making sure they're open and willing to be innovative at implementing the use of digital assets in their economy. Highlighting some issues here with legacy and the current correspondent banking system with their high fees, slow transactions, and lack of automation, and how it overall creates for a less financially inclusive economy with these barriers. So this is good. They get the issues with economic inclusion with this current system in place. There's no reason I should have to pay a $50 fee just to send another $50 abroad, or wait a whole ass weekend before I have access to any financial services. And as we're all aware, the use of digital assets can 100% solve all of those problems I just listed. So some stuff here talking about how they want to support the growth of this space, but in a manner that's properly monitored and regulated at the infrastructure, from things like illicit finance and unnecessary pollution. Section 3 here, nothing really exciting. Well, I should say nothing exciting for now. They're just talking about how all these agencies such as the SEC, the Attorney General, FTC, CFTC, Secretary and Homeland Security, and a whole bunch of other agencies are going to coordinate and work together to properly implement and build the frameworks for this space to be properly regulated. And again, this is a good thing compared to what's happening now, because right now it's just Gensler in charge of the SEC basically claiming everything's a security and going after everything he can in this space, whether that's Ripple, Terra Luna, lending platforms, Coinbase, whatever. So the fact there's going to be a whole bunch of agencies all working together now hopefully makes it for a bit more of a fair and less just one party making all the rules. And then section 4 here, this is where the CBDC talks kind of start off. So they're talking about sort of their plans in regards to a central bank digital currency. These first two sections just sort of talk about the importance of a CBDC in the fiat system and how a US CBDC should be regulated to protect consumers. Nothing that's really too interesting, so I'll just skip all that and hop right to the more interesting side of things, where they're talking about the benefits of a CBDC. So basically things like a more efficient financial system through lowering costs and the ease of accessibility through a digital wallet. And here they talk about how a CBDC would benefit if it were interoperable with other CBDCs around the world to make for a more interconnected global financial system, and having the US be a supporter of this change. And I'm sure most of us know a certain network out there that could do that with 3 lines of code. So within 180 days of this order, or by September 5th of this year, the Secretary of Treasury, along with the Secretary of State, Attorney General, Secretary of Commerce, and a bunch of other agencies, they're going to be presenting a report on the future of money and payments and how this technology is disrupting all that. So these are all pretty good things. They're open to the change and willing to cooperate with multiple agencies to do so, which again is huge, because we can't just have one agency regulating over this whole space. Our legacy system doesn't seem to have that, so why should this space be any different? After all, it's all the same shit, just now we'll have instant settlements and true proof of ownership through a distributed ledger. And here it brings up some additional points to all the good that a CBDC could do, but also some risks it might bring. So some things here are like the ease of implicating interest rates, financial inclusion, and foreign CBDCs undermining the US dollar's power, and things like sanctions, illicit finance, etc. And then there's a couple more deadlines they've put out here, like how in 180 days, the Attorney General, Federal Reserve, and Secretary of Treasury will assess whether there will be a need to have legislative changes in order to properly integrate CBDCs into the US's current economy. Now, on to Section 5. They're kind of going over some methods and measures they'll take to ensure protection to investors and businesses, highlighting some risks of digital assets like theft, data breaches, fraud, and how less informed market participants kind of are more at risk. So this is kind of a debatable topic with how fast the space moves at the moment, just due to how early it is in the adoption cycle. If you're not super well informed and caught up in the space, and you haven't done your own research, you can get fucked over pretty hard. That's just the way things are at the moment. We all gotta pay real close attention to what's happening. As much as I preach how innovative this technology is, it is still at the end of the day seen as a risky investment. So what they're gonna do really in that aspect, I'm not too sure. And in addition to the order that was due in 180 days about the future of money, they're also going to be talking about the implications of development in this space and how mass adoption could be reached, along with the risks and opportunities it presents. And this report is going to include policy recommendations such as potential regulatory actions that would be appropriate at protecting US consumers, investors, and businesses. Another report basically to present a technical evaluation on what would be needed to integrate a CBDC. And basically this report just is going to be more of what this executive order has been highlighting, just weighing out the pros and cons of a CBDC and how it would be integrated at the infrastructure level. And honestly, the next little bit of this is kind of just about some other reports that Biden's putting out. So instead of going so in depth into every one of these, I'll just highlight and summarize some of the key points they're putting in these. But really, it's just more or less the same stuff we've been going over. So if you want to read a little more in depth into these, I'll leave a link below, or if you want to read it here, I suggest you pause the video. So some of these points are addressing technical and systemic risks with the CBDC. So things like cybersecurity, law enforcement, and prosecutions of criminal activity through the use of digital assets. Then there's a lot more of addressing risks, the energy transitions in the short, medium, and long term of DLTs and different consensus mechanisms, and uses of a blockchain to potentially monitor and track emissions and other natural resources. And then other additional implications and standards that they may be considering to best suit energy efficiency. So overall, most of that is good. They seem to actually be trying to learn and understand both the pros and cons to what this space has to offer. And the fact they're considering somehow integrating blockchain to monitor energy usage and natural resources should be a pretty big eye-opener. Because again, this is the US saying they'll be looking to integrate this technology at the core economic level to strengthen the company's resources and capabilities. And if that doesn't show you adoption, I don't know what really will. Section 7 talks about some of the actions to limit things like illicit finance and security risks. So they're starting out talking about some of the risks and cybercrimes that are done through crypto. So like ransomware and hacks, and then they come and introduce a whole bunch of other reports that are going to be due soon. So in 90 days, or by June 7th, there's going to be multiple reports submitted that are just kind of offering additional views on risks of illicit finance that are brought by digital assets and trends that are in use by these illicit actors. Then by July 7th, they also plan to have an order out that's going to address the importance and role of certain measures to mitigate risks while increasing compliance with KYC, AML, and CFT laws. And I know this is a whole lot of sections, guys, but we're almost there, just one more after this one. So Section 8 now talks about policies and actions to international cooperation and US competitiveness. So they understand that any sort of financial innovation that revolves around technology will be a global thing, and thus require more international cooperation with other jurisdictions. And since, well, in a globalized financial system like this, if two countries have really different laws, it could lead to a lot of legal arbitrage and financial stability risks, because now you're technically complying to one country but not in the other. So they're going to look to build some sort of standard regulatory framework with all these other countries to make sure the rules can all be agreed upon to a certain extent. And then there's some more talks here about how the US will continue support for the G20 roadmap to address problems with cross-border trade. And for anyone unaware of what G20 is, it's basically 20 of the top countries in the world with the strongest economies all cooperating and working together to solve global economical and financial issues. But basically the US will work with other G20 nations to see how a CBDC can really help with these issues and how interoperability between international CBDCs can best work. And here it highlights that the Financial Stability Board, along with other international standards setting bodies, are working together to work on problems and risks related to stablecoins and cross-border funds, while the Financial Actions Task Force, FATF, is looking at setting AML and CFT standards for this space. And then another due date by July 7th. This will be a framework to update and kind of just discuss internationally how these digital assets are being used today and ways to promote further development of digital assets and CBDCs in a way that would be more compliant and risk averse. And then here's some more talks about how some of these agencies will work together to form a plan to enhance the US in their economic competitiveness to be a leader in this space by leveraging more of what these digital assets can bring. And then Section 9 kind of just goes over some of the definitions and terms used in the space. I honestly don't think I have to go over this, since most of you guys, I'd assume, are pretty deep in the space yourselves already anyways. But for those of you guys who are newer here, blockchain pretty much refers to any distributed ledger or network where data is stored on-chain with a fully verifiable history that shows the proof of history and ownership, and it's usually secured through cryptography. CBDC, central bank digital currency, we mentioned this one a lot in this video. Essentially just fiat currency issued by the government, but now on a distributed ledger. Cryptocurrencies are pretty much digital assets that you can store in your own self-custody wallet and is on a blockchain where you can verify your ownership. Stablecoins are like CBDCs, but not issued by the central bank, and they're usually pegged to a fiat currency, though oftentimes it's questionable how they get their backing. Digital assets are pretty much all of the above that I just mentioned. And then here at the last section is just some general provisions at the end, which I won't really be going over as they're not too relevant to what we've discussed today. But overall, I'd say everything in this executive order went about as good as we could have asked in regards to being someone on the utility side of things. They're just getting into actually learning about this space now, so it's going to take some time for things to actually take place, as we've seen with all the actions they've put in. But for now, their main focuses seem to be on having more unified and inclusive frameworks around a bunch of other agencies, both in the US and around the world, to best regulate this space, which is definitely something needed, because clearly with Gary Gensler thinking he's the man to be in charge of regulating this entire space from digital assets to lending protocols, that shit's just not working and honestly makes zero sense. And two, to reduce the illicit financial and security risks and finding a way to protect investors and businesses that are looking to get in this space, whether it be regards to hacks and ransomware or things like money laundering, fraud, crime funding, etc. Obviously, those rules will have to be developed and put in place, because I don't care how bullish you are on the space, with some of the security risks and just overall lack of knowledge at the moment, we're not ready for mass retail adoption quite yet. And 3, they seem to really be focused on weighing out the pros and cons that this technology can bring, and having these agencies actually get educated on what's happening and some of the aspects it can bring, like economic inclusion and a more efficient financial system. But also some of things to worry about, like maintaining power with the US dollar and the whole ESG debates. Number 4, how the US wants to remain a national leader in both the global financial system, but also in regards to technological innovation. So they're gonna have to be supportive of the innovation, because if not, other countries will gladly take over that large market share and have it run in their economies. And then finally 5, obviously there were tons of talks about a CBDC highlighted. Obviously, it's been an ongoing idea for some time now, and just like with everything in this executive order, they're really weighing out the risk reward to a CBDC and see what it could bring to the general micro and macro economic landscape, but also what new issues it could potentially cause in regards to national security and international laws. So a lot of us were expecting something probably far more harsh, like maybe more bans and restrictions, but so far, fortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. Granted, this executive order was just the start, hence why there's so many other orders and reports that are coming up that we mentioned. So for the most part, they're still trying to get educated and get a better grasp at this space before they do anything extreme. And honestly, that's what we need more of, because remember, at first, it seemed like there was a good chance we would have just gotten much more strict regulations just a year ago, when a good majority of the narrative was just illegal drug money and for trafficking and scams. So seeing a change in viewpoints like this and being open to being educated is definitely something we want to hear. But to be honest, this executive order could have been summarized in one sentence, with them saying, "We don't really understand much about this space aside from what's heard in mainstream media, but we're going to be open to adopting it and building the proper regulatory framework with other organizations around the world to make sure nobody gets hurt." So we'll have to see what the stance on all these other additional orders are like before we can really make more of a judgment. But for now, things seem to be pretty good in the approach they're taking. Let's just hope they keep their word for it. But yeah, that's the breakdown of Biden's executive order on digital assets. I hope everyone got something good out of it, whatever it may be. And if you liked what you saw today, don't forget to show some love by hitting that like and subscribe button and turning that ringer on so you don't miss a thing. And remember to check me out on some of my other content platforms too. You guys can always connect or just stay up to date with me and read my posts on Telegram, Twitter, and Instagram. Or if you want more fundamental analysis, I got a bunch of articles on Medium. All this can be found at Tokenicer. And for those of you guys who don't want to read, I got you guys right here with the Spotify podcast at Tokenice TV. But yeah, that's about all for today. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, remember to stay safe and keep grinding. Until next time, guys, peace.